All right, folks. So today we're going to talk about commenting. Good news, commenting is not a very technical portion of programming. It's not something that's going to require advanced degrees to do. And it's kind of an underappreciated skill, I think. And I'll share with you why it was, where I figured out it was important. So, first of all, comments are going to be little notes that you would leave to other programmers or to yourself, and it'll allow you to kind of come back and figure out what you were doing at a certain point in the program. And my own experience, my first few years in college, I was very good at programming. And I did a lot of programs that some of my fellow students had to sit down and really plan out. I could kind of conceptualize them and get them to a certain point in my head. But I remember my junior year, I ended up in a class, and it was a system software class, and I tried to do a very large program, like 400 line program in my head, and it just didn't work. And I wasn't leaving myself notes as to what certain lines of code did, and I would look at it and I'd say, okay, this is wrong. I don't know what I was thinking, and switch it, and then I go back and say, nope, nope, that was wrong. And I just, I remember spending a ton of time on a program that I really shouldn't have spent a ton of time on. And it was all because I didn't take the time to give myself some help. And that's what the comments are going to be for. They allow you to kind of explain your logic. So within any program, and what we're going to do in a minute or two is we're going to take a look at our previous program from a previous video, and we're going to add some comments kind of explaining what's going on. So basically within Python, and again, your mileage may be a little different in other programming language. Your mileage may vary, as they say. But you would start any line with a pound sign or a hashtag, and that's going to be how you would represent that this is going to be a comment. So it's ignored by Python. The other thing is you want to stay simple, but also be thorough. One of the big things that was an adjustment for me in the real world, my previous programming position, I was putting defense systems on military crafts, primarily the CV-22 craft I was working on. And that program overall, with all the components, was between 700,000 and 800,000 lines of ADA programming when I was there. May have gone up a bit since then, but for those 700,000 to 800,000 lines of code, there were over 1 million lines of comments. And that sounds excessive, I'm certain of it. But for me as a new programmer, it enabled me to go in and look at other people's code and figure out what they were thinking and why they were doing certain things. It's a little tough, I think, as a new programmer to say, okay, well, why am I doing this for a 5-line program? If you don't get into the habit of doing it and make it part of your process now, as the programs get bigger, you won't do it in the future. So, keep in mind, the larger the project, the more programmers that are going to pass through and leave a company. At ITT, we had people who retired. We had people who left the company. People who were reassigned to other areas. You couldn't always just go over to somebody's cubicle and say, hey, what were you thinking here? So it was really part of the process to make sure that you left comments for that reason. So I have our program from last time. I have it opened up already. And you'll notice that if we give this a run, it runs just fine. So you would say, well, why do I need comments? And as we said, Python doesn't care. You could have 100 lines of comments. You could have no lines. Python itself doesn't care. The person who's going to care is you or me when we have to update this code. So if it's been a while since you saw the last video where we talked about input statements, you may be looking at the code and saying, okay, what did we do here? Why were we doing this? And that's the exact reason we need comments. So what I would typically do is, especially early on, I would try to comment and be very anal with my commenting, very detailed with my commenting. You don't want to, you don't have to explain the language to people necessarily. You would expect if somebody's updating your Python program, they understand Python. But you want to give a little bit of detail as to what the logic is and what you're trying to do. Within that larger context, a bigger program, maybe you only need to leave, 10 lines of comments for, 10 lines of code or something like that. But for this program, I'm going to be really almost overdoing the comments, but I think you'll see the difference for new programmers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give some details in plain English as to what that previous or what the following line is going to be doing. So for example, in this case, I'm explaining that we are inputting a name from the user and saving it in the variable, maybe even say called name. And hopefully that gives you a little more feedback as to what is going on there. And again, you're going to give details there. In a case like this where you have a few consecutive lines, you might want to kind of give a block comment. And you really don't want people to have to scroll left to right, so you could certainly put multi-line comments here. And you can see that kind of gives a comment for that next block of 4 lines. And try to simplify it. Even as I was typing that, I'm like, I could probably do better than that. We could say, something like this. And you can see there's 4 lines for one single line. Again, we're overdoing it a bit. Now what I'll draw your attention to is we have here our previous run. When I run this, I do the exact same input. The person running the program does not know whether you've commented or not, because it doesn't matter to them. You don't get to see people's code a lot of times. But the person who will appreciate it is either the future version of yourself who has to go back and update this program, and this is certainly going to be a lot more friendly than the version I put together without comments, or if I were to give this program to someone else and ask them to update it, then they would also be hopefully pretty grateful to see this level of detail. Just as a side note, this is, red and green are the colors that IDLE uses. Other programming languages, other Python tools may use different colors. Red-green is not the best color, just combination due to color blindness. It's the most common type of color blindness. So I'm going to leave it as the default, but in a real-world environment, I would probably switch the colors up a little bit just so, you know, just so the color coding stands out a little better. But again, all we did here was we did not change a line of code. We didn't change any programming logic. We just added comments and documentation to the program. And trust me, that's gonna help a lot. And I wish 20 some odd years ago, when I was sitting in that computer lab in Richardson Hall in Montclair, I wish I had commented my program. I learned my lesson at that point. Hopefully it doesn't take you until your junior year to learn it. So hopefully this helps. We're going to work on numbers in future videos. We're going to do some arithmetic operations, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and so on. I'll have a link to this final version of the code in the description below, and a link to the playlist as well for the entire set of Python videos. Hopefully you learned something today, and see you in the next video.